Day 9 came with gray skies and the distant rumble of atmospheric processors working at maximum capacity in the underground laboratories of Keth Hollow. The human volunteers had given everything they had, and some of them had given more. 2 names had been added to the Kethari Memorial Stones. Dr. Kim Tae-yeon, a young biologist who had been on his first deep space mission, had died from complications after his 5th extraction procedure. His heart had simply stopped, worn out by the demands placed upon it. And he had passed quietly in the medical bay with his crewmates. Beside him, engineer Choi Yuna had followed him 3 days later, her body unable to recover from the stress of repeated donations. And she had spent her last hours helping to calibrate the distribution systems for the counteragent. The Kethari had never seen anything like this in their 10,000 years of recorded history. No outsider had ever died for them. The memorial stones of Keth Hollow held the names of Kethari heroes and ancestors, leaders and teachers and artists who had shaped their civilization. And now 2 human names were carved there as well, placed among the honored dead, as if they had always belonged. Elder Chisk presided over the ceremony herself. She spoke the traditional words in her own language, then repeated them in the human tongue, so that the crew of the Persistent Dawn would understand what they meant. "These names shall endure," she said. "When the stars grow cold and the galaxy grows dark, these names shall still be spoken. For they gave their lives so that others might live, and there is no greater gift and no higher honor." Captain Park Jin-ho stood in the front row, his arms still bandaged, his face drawn with exhaustion and grief. And he listened to the ancient words spoken over his fallen crew members. He had not slept in 4 days. He could not sleep, because every time he closed his eyes, he saw the spreading blight on the maps, saw the countdown that Dr. Beek Mina had calculated, saw the 11 days shrinking to 10, then 9. Then 8. Elder Chisk found him after the ceremony, standing alone on a balcony overlooking the city. The toxic haze had grown thinner in the past few days, pushed back by the counteragent that was spreading through the atmosphere, but it was still there, still waiting, still threatening to return. "You should rest," the elder said. "So everyone keeps telling me. They tell you because they are worried about you." Park Jin-ho turned to look at the ancient Kethari, and something in his eyes made her pause. "My grandmother used to tell me stories about the war," he said. "About hiding in a basement while the world burned above her. About neighbors who brought food in the darkness. About how she survived because people chose to help." Elder Chisk nodded, remembering the story he had told her weeks ago. "I asked her once why they did it," the captain continued. "Why they risked their lives for a stranger. Why they gave their food when they were starving themselves. And she said something that I've never forgotten." He paused, looking out at the wounded city. "She said that someone always answers," he said. "She said that no matter how dark the night gets, someone always hears the call, and someone always comes. And she said that believing this was not foolishness or naivety, but the most practical wisdom she had ever learned." Elder Chisk was silent for a long moment. "Your grandmother sounds like she was very wise." She finally said. "She was," Park Jin-ho agreed. "And she was right, because you called for 31 years. And we heard you, and we came. And that is not a miracle or an exception. That is just what people do when they choose to be more than their fear." Day 11 arrived. Dr. Beek Mina stood before the assembled crews of every human ship in orbit, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "We have produced enough counteragent," she announced. "The distribution systems are ready, and when we activate them, the compound will spread through the atmosphere and neutralize the blight." A cheer went up from the human volunteers. "Exhausted and battered, but still standing. It will take years for Verth 7 to fully heal," Dr. Beek continued. "The damage is extensive, and recovery will be slow. But the planet will survive, and the Kethari will survive. And that is what matters." Elder Chisk gave the order to activate the distribution systems. The counteragent rose into the sky, carried by winds and currents, spreading across a world that had been waiting to die, and for the first time in 31 years. The black began to recede. The Galactic Assembly received a formal report from the Mozic delegate 2 weeks later. It contained a single recommendation: humanity should be granted full voting membership in the Galactic Assembly. Immediately, the report stated, they have demonstrated what this body has forgotten: that civilization is not measured by power or wealth or technological advancement, but by the willingness to answer when others call for help. The Valorics protested, the Threnary abstained, and the motion passed anyway, carried by the votes of dozens of minor species who had watched everything unfold, who had seen the humans come when no one else would, who had remembered what they had once believed about kindness and connection and the web that joined all living things. 1 year later, Elder Chisk traveled to Earth as the first Cathari ambassador to humanity. She was old now, older than she had been when the crisis began, but there was something new in her eyes. Something that had not been there before: hope, perhaps, or maybe just a memory of hope, which was sometimes enough. A reporter asked her what she thought of humanity, and she considered the question for a long time before she answered. They are small, she said. They are fragile, and they live such brief lives, and they feel everything so deeply that it sometimes seems like they will break under the weight of their own emotions. She paused, and a strange smile crossed her ancient face. They are impossibly stubborn, she continued, and they refuse to accept the way things are when they believe the way things are is wrong. And they came for us when no one else would, when we had given up, when we had stopped believing that anyone would ever answer. The reporter waited. So what do I think of humanity? Elder Chisk said, I think they are exactly what the galaxy needed. And I think we are very lucky that they heard us calling on the persistent dawn. Captain Park Jinho stood at a window and watched. Vareth 7 turned slowly in the darkness of space. The planet was healing. The brown and gray patches were shrinking, replaced by spreading green and blue, and the toxic haze had thinned to almost nothing. Dr. Beekmina joined him at the window. Her own scars faded but still visible, reminders of what she had given. Neither of them spoke for a long time. They did not need to below them. A world that had been abandoned was coming back to life. And somewhere in the vast darkness of the galaxy, other voices were calling. Other worlds were waiting. And the humans were listening. They would always be listening, because that was what it meant to be human, to hear the call and to answer. The news reached Earth through unofficial channels, passed from ship to ship across the vast distances of human space like a whispered secret that refused to stay quiet. A research vessel called the Persistent Dawn had gone to a dying world. Its crew was sacrificing their own bodies to save an alien species that the galaxy had abandoned, and no one had ordered them to do it. The story spread through networks and news feeds, through private messages and public broadcasts, until it seemed like everyone on Earth and every human colony had heard some version of what was happening on Vareth 7. The United Territories government was not pleased. Official communications were sent to Captain Park Jinho demanding that he explain his actions and justify his decision to involve humanity in what the Galactic Assembly had called a natural extinction event. The captain received these communications in the medical bay of the Persistent Dawn, where he was recovering from his second extraction procedure. His left arm was bandaged and his face was pale, but his eyes were clear when he read the government's demands. He dictated his response on an open channel, knowing that it would be intercepted by everyone, knowing that there would be no taking it back. I understand that my actions may have political consequences, he said, his voice calm and steady despite his exhaustion. I understand that the Galactic Assembly disapproves of our presence here. I understand that my government would prefer that we follow protocols and procedures and polite diplomatic norms." He paused and looked at the camera that was recording his message. "But there are 9 billion people on this planet who are dying because the galaxy decided they were not worth saving." He continued, "And I cannot accept that because we do not abandon people. And if Earth disagrees with that principle, then Earth can come here and drag us home." The transmission ended within hours. It had been copied and shared across every human network in existence within days. Something extraordinary began to happen. Ships started leaving for Vareth 7. They were not military vessels or government transports. They were cargo haulers and mining ships. Private yachts and converted freighters, old vessels held together by hope and repair patches and the stubbornness of their crews. They carried supplies and equipment and volunteers. Ordinary people who had heard the story and decided that they could not sit still while others were suffering. A retired teacher from the Mars colonies loaded her savings into a transport ship and set course for a world she had never heard of before. A group of engineers from the asteroid mining stations pooled their resources to buy medical equipment that the persistent Dawn desperately needed. A family of farmers from the outer colonies brought seeds and growing systems. Because someone had to think about what would come after the crisis was over. They came without organization, without orders, without any guarantee that they would be welcomed or that they would survive. They came because someone was calling for help. And they had decided to answer. Elder Chisk stood on the observation platform of Keth Hollow and watched the human ships arrive. There were dozens of them now. A ragged flotilla that had no military coordination and no strategic purpose. Just a collection of vessels that had come because their crews believed it was the right thing to do. She had no frame of reference for what she was seeing. In 10,000 years of Cathari history, no species had ever done this. No one had ever come to help without being asked, without demanding payment, without calculating the strategic advantages of their generosity. The humans were not even organized. They were just people. Individual people making individual choices, answering a call that had not been addressed to them. "I do not understand your species," Elder Chisk said to Captain Park Jinho, who stood beside her watching the ships descend through the hazy atmosphere. "Neither do we." "Sometimes," the captain admitted, "but that might be the point." "What do you mean?" Park Jinho watched a cargo vessel land in the distance, its hull scarred from years of hard use. Its crew already preparing to unload supplies that they had brought from halfway across human space. "Humans are not one thing," he said. "We are not all brave or all kind or all good. But we have the capacity to choose what we want to be. And sometimes, when the moment demands it, we choose to be more than we thought we could be." The Galactic Assembly convened an emergency session. The Valorix delegation demanded immediate sanctions against humanity for their unauthorized interference in the Vareth 7 situation. They argued that humans were too young, too reckless, and too dangerous to be allowed to act without supervision. The Threnary delegation proposed a formal vote on economic penalties and travel restrictions. The debate lasted for hours, with species after species weighing in on the question of what to do about the troublesome humans who refused to accept the galaxy's judgment. And then something unexpected happened. A junior delegate from the Mosaic Empire rose to speak. The Mosaic had not spoken in an assembly session for over 300 years. They were ancient and powerful and utterly silent, observing everything and participating in nothing. And their sudden decision to break that silence made the entire chamber fall quiet. "I have a question," the Mosaic delegate said, and her voice carried the weight of centuries. "A question for every species in this chamber." She looked around the room with eyes that had seen empires rise and fall. The Cathari spent 31 years calling for help. she said. They sent thousands of messages to this assembly and to every major power in the galaxy. And none of us answered, so my question is simple. She paused. And the silence was absolute. Why did none of us answer? No one spoke. The humans answered. The Mosaic delegate continued. They are young and weak, and they have almost nothing to offer. But they heard a cry for help, and they came. And now I must ask myself what that says about them, and what our silence says about us. The vote on sanctions was called. The Valorics voted in favor. The Threnary abstained. As they always did, and one by one, the minor species of the galaxy, the ones who had always been ignored, the ones who had always been told that their voices did not matter, voted against. The motion failed. No sanctions were imposed, but no aid was offered either. The galaxy watched and waited and remained silent. And on Varus 7, the human volunteers kept working, kept sacrificing, kept fighting a battle against time and death and the indifference of the universe. Dr. Beek Mina calculated that they had 11 days before the blight reached a tipping point beyond which no amount of counteraging could save the planet. 11 days to produce enough cure for 9 billion people. 11 days to prove that answering was worth more than silence. The race was far from over. 3 weeks had passed since the persistent dawn had landed on Var 7, and the blight had not stopped spreading every morning. Captain Park Jin-ho received updated maps showing the contamination zones growing larger, creeping across the planet like a slow tide of death every morning. He looked at those maps and felt the weight of time pressing down on him. The Valorics had refused their request for the catalyst. The Threnary had abstained from involvement, citing their precious protocols. The Mosaic had not even acknowledged the message. The galaxy had made its position clear, and that position was silence in the underground laboratories of Keth Hollow. Dr. Beek Mina had not slept in 4 days. She sat surrounded by screens and datapads, her eyes red and her hands trembling from too much stimulant and too little rest, searching for an alternative that might not exist. The Gathari scientists watched her with something between admiration and concern. They had never seen anyone work like this, pushing themselves past exhaustion, past reason, past everything that made sense. You should rest, one of them said. A young researcher named Churik, who had become something like a friend to the human doctor, Dr. Beek, looked up from her work and managed a tired smile. I will rest when we find a solution, she said. You will collapse before then. Maybe, she admitted. But I would rather collapse trying than give up while I can still stand. Churik did not understand. None of the Cathari really understood. They had been abandoned so many times that they had learned to accept abandonment as the natural order of things. These humans, with their stubborn refusal to surrender, were something outside their experience. Elder Chisk came to visit the laboratory that evening, walking slowly through the corridors of the underground complex with Captain Park Jin-ho at her side. The captain had aged in the past 3 weeks. His hair had more gray in it than before, and the lines around his eyes had deepened. But there was something in his gaze that had not changed, a determination that seemed immune to disappointment. I want to tell you a story, Elder Chisk said as they walked. A story about what my people used to believe. Park Jin-ho nodded and listened. Once, we thought the galaxy was like a great web, the elder continued, and every species was a thread in that web, connected to every other thread, so that when one thread was pulled, all the others felt it. She paused beside a window that looked out onto a garden that had once been beautiful, now brown and withered under the toxic sky. We believed in reciprocity, she said. We believed that kindness given would become kindness returned, that helping others was not just good, but wise, because someday we might need help ourselves. Park Jin-ho waited. We were naive, Elder Chisk said, and her voice was heavy with decades of disappointment. The galaxy does not work that way. And the web we believed in was only an illusion, because when we needed help, we discovered that the threads we thought connected us to others were never really there at all. The captain looked at the dying garden, then at the ancient Cathari beside him. "So you stopped believing," he said. "We learned the truth." "No," Park Jin-ho said quietly. "You learned what other species believe, but that does not make it the truth. Because truth is not decided by majority vote." Elder Chisk turned to look at him, her amber eyes unreadable. "You should take your crew and leave," she said. "Before humanity inherits our fate, before your stubbornness costs you everything, you should go home and forget about us." "I cannot do that." "Why?" Park Jin-ho thought about the question, searching for words that could explain something that felt too big for a language. "Because my grandmother survived a war," he finally said. "She hid in a basement for 3 months while her city burned. And she survived because every night her neighbors would bring her food. Even though they had almost nothing themselves. Even though they risked death by helping her." He paused, remembering stories told in a small apartment on Earth. Stories about darkness and fear and the small lights that people carried for each other. When I asked her why they did it, she said it was because some things matter more than survival, he continued. She said that being human meant choosing to help, even when it was dangerous, even when it made no sense, even when nobody else would. Elder Chisk was silent for a long time. "That is a beautiful story," she said at last. "But stories do not stop the blight." "No," Park Jin-ho agreed. "But people do, and I am not leaving." The next morning, Dr. Beek Mina called an emergency meeting. She stood before the assembled crew and the Cathari High Council, looking exhausted but alive with a strange energy that made everyone lean forward to listen. "I have found an alternative," she said. "A way to synthesize the counteragent without the Valoric's catalyst." Hope flickered in the room like a candle flame. "But there is a cost," she continued, and her voice grew quiet. "The alternative synthesis requires a biological component that we cannot manufacture. A specific protein chain that can only be extracted from living tissue." She paused, and the room held its breath. "Human tissue," she said. "The process will work if we use samples from human volunteers. But the extraction will be painful, and it will leave lasting damage. And I cannot guarantee that everyone who volunteers will survive." Silence fell. Captain Park Jin-ho looked at his crew, at the 42 humans who had followed him to a dying world, and he saw no fear in their faces. "I volunteer," he said. "Captain," Dr. Beek began. "I volunteer," he said again. "And I suspect I will not be alone." One by one, every member of the crew raised their hands. The Valoric's ambassador, watching from the observation vessel in orbit, filed a report that night. "The humans are displaying irrational self-destructive behavior." The report read, "They appear willing to sacrifice their own health and possibly their lives for a species that offers them no strategic advantage and no material benefit. And I recommend immediate quarantine protocols for their homeworld to prevent this psychological contagion from spreading." The Galactic Assembly received the report and did nothing. Galaxy watched and waited and offered nothing but silence. And in the laboratories of Keth Hollow, the first batch of counteragent was synthesized. Paid for in human blood and human pain, it was enough to save one district. There were 217 districts on Varus 7. The work had only begun. The transmission came through at 3 in the morning, station time, when Ambassador Yum Sora was alone in the communications room of Outpost 17. She had been reviewing trade reports, the kind of dull work that nobody else wanted to do. When the signal cut through the static like a cry in the dark, the voice was not human. It belonged to something ancient, something tired, and something that had stopped hoping a long time ago. "This is the final message from the Cathari High Council to the Galactic Assembly," the voice said, each word heavy with exhaustion. We have sent 4,712 requests for aid over the past 31 years. And we have received 4,712 refusals or silences in return. Yunsora leaned forward in her chair, her fingers frozen above the console. The atmospheric blight continues to spread across our world, the voice continued. Our scientists estimate that within 18 months, Vareth 7 will no longer support life of any kind. And the Cathari people, all 9 billion of us, will cease to exist. The ambassador had read about the Cathari in her training materials. They were an insectoid species, tall and graceful, known throughout the galaxy for their beautiful cities and their deep philosophical traditions. They had been members of the Galactic Assembly for over 10,000 years. They had sheltered refugees during the collapse wars when other species had closed their borders. They had shared their technology freely and asked for nothing in return, and now they were dying, and nobody would help them. We do not send this message as a plea, the voice said. And Yunsora could hear something breaking in those words. We have begged enough, and we have learned what our begging is worth to those we once called friends. The transmission paused, and in that silence, the ambassador could almost feel the weight of 3 decades of unanswered calls. We send this message as a farewell, the voice finally said. Let it be recorded that the Cathari did not go quietly into extinction, and let it be remembered that we asked for help, and the galaxy chose to look away. The signal ended. Yunsora sat in the darkness of the communications room for a long time, staring at the console, feeling something cold settle in her chest. She was a junior ambassador stationed at a minor outpost on the edge of human space. She had no authority to make decisions about galactic matters. She was supposed to forward unusual transmissions to her superiors and wait for instructions. That was the protocol. That was what a good diplomat would do. But Yunsora kept thinking about the voice, about the exhaustion in it, about how it sounded like someone who had knocked on every door in a burning building and found them all locked. She pulled up the records on the Cathari and started reading the first request for aid. Had been sent 31 years ago, when the blight was just a small patch of discolored atmosphere over the southern continent. The Cathari scientists had identified it immediately as something artificial, a bioengineered weapon left over from a war that had ended before humans had learned to make fire. They had contained it, studied it, and realized they lacked the biological expertise to destroy it. So they had asked for help. The Valoric Scientific Consortium, the most advanced research collective in the galaxy, had reviewed the request and declined. Their official reason was resource allocation priorities, but the unofficial reason, according to the notes Yunsora found buried in diplomatic archives, was that the Cathari had outstanding debts from a cultural exchange program 3 centuries earlier. The Cathari had asked the Threnary Collective next. The Threnary had cited their non-intervention protocols, which stated that they could not interfere in the natural development of other species, when the Cathari pointed out that the blight was not natural, that it was a weapon created by an extinct species. The Threnary had simply stopped responding. The Mosaic Empire had never responded at all year after year. The Cathari had sent their requests, and year after year, the galaxy had ignored them. Meanwhile, the blight had spread. It moved slowly at first, creeping across the southern continent like a stain, turning the air toxic and the soil barren. Then it reached the ocean currents and began to accelerate. Cities were evacuated. Farmland was abandoned. The Cathari retreated northward, then eastward, then into underground shelters, always running, always hoping that someone would answer their calls. Nobody did. Yunsora closed the files and sat in the darkness, feeling something she had not felt since she was a child watching news reports about disasters on the other side of Earth. She felt angry, not the polite, diplomatic anger that she had been trained to express in carefully worded statements, but something raw and heavy, something that made her hands shake. The Cathari had helped everyone. They had opened their doors when others were suffering. And now that they were the ones who needed help, every door in the galaxy had slammed shut. It was wrong. It was simply, purely, fundamentally wrong. Yungsora knew what she was supposed to do. She was supposed to file the transmission, add a note recommending review, and wait for her superiors to make a decision. By the time that decision came, if it ever came, the Cathari would probably be dead. So she did something else. She copied the transmission and the files she had gathered, and she sent them directly to Earth, to the United Territories Command, bypassing every level of diplomatic protocol that existed. Then she added a personal message. "I am forwarding this because I believe someone should know," she wrote. "I am not asking for permission or approval. I understand that I may face consequences for this action, but I could not live with myself if I did nothing." She sent the message and sat back in her chair, waiting for her career to end. 3 days later, a ship changed course. The research vessel Persistent Dawn had been conducting surveys in a nearby system when Captain Park Jin-ho received a forwarded copy of the Cathari transmission. He was not supposed to receive it. Someone in the United Territories Command had leaked it, and that someone would probably never be identified. Park Jin-ho read the transmission 3 times. Then he called his crew together and told them what he was planning to do. "We are not a rescue fleet," he said, standing in the common room of the Persistent Dawn while his 42 crew members listened. "We are a research vessel with limited supplies, limited equipment, and no military support. And if we go to Vera 7, we will be going against the wishes of the Galactic Assembly and possibly against the orders of our own government." He paused and looked at the faces around him. "But there are 9 billion people on that planet who have been calling for help for 31 years, he said. "And I think someone should answer." He gave them a choice. Anyone who wanted to leave could take an escape pod to the nearest station. No questions asked, no consequences recorded. Nobody left. The Persistent Dawn changed course for Vera 7. And somewhere in the vast darkness of space, a dying world received a signal that made no sense. A ship was coming. Someone had heard them. Someone was answering at last. The Persistent Dawn entered orbit around Vera 7 on a cold morning. The mornings on a dying world meant little anymore from space. The planet looked sick. Great patches of brown and gray spread across continents that had once been green and blue. And the atmosphere carried a haze that even the ship's sensors could detect as toxic. Captain Park Jin-ho stood at the observation window and watched the world turn beneath him. Somewhere down there, 9 billion Cathari were waiting to die. "Captain," his communications officer said, "we are receiving a transmission from the surface, and they want to know who we are and why we are here." Park Jin-ho nodded and made his way to the bridge. The face that appeared on the main screen was not human. Elder Chisk of the Cathari High Council had compound eyes that reflected the light in shades of deep amber, and her exoskeleton was the color of aged bronze. She was tall, elegant, and very old, and she looked at the human captain with an expression that Park Jin-ho could not quite read. "I am Captain Park Jin-ho of the human research vessel Persistent Dawn," he said, keeping his voice calm and steady. "We received your transmission, and we have come to help." The silence that followed lasted a long time. "Help," Elder Chisk finally said, and the word came out flat and empty. "You have come to help." "Yes. The Valorics refused us aid because of debts we incurred 300 years ago," the Elder said. "The Threnary cited protocols that they invented specifically to justify their refusal. And the Mazak have not spoken to us in decades, but you, a species that has been part of the galactic community for less than a century, "I've come to help." Park Jin-ho did not flinch. "Yes," he said again. Elder Chisk leaned forward, and her amber eyes seemed to pierce through the screen. "What do you want from us, human?" she asked. "What technology do you seek to salvage from our dying world? And what price will you demand when we are too desperate to refuse?" The captain understood. He understood because he had read the reports. And he knew what other species had done to the Cathari in their time of need. Scavengers had come, offering help in exchange for ancient artifacts and priceless knowledge, taking what they wanted and leaving when they had gotten enough. The Cathari had learned to expect nothing else. "I want nothing from you," Park Jin-ho said. "I have come because I heard your transmission, and I could not ignore it. That is not how the galaxy works." "Then the galaxy is wrong." Elder Chisk stared at him for a long moment, and something shifted in her ancient eyes. Something that might have been confusion or disbelief or the first fragile stirring of hope. "You may land," she said quietly, "but do not expect us to trust you, because we have trusted before. And we have learned what trust earns in this galaxy. The persistent." Dawn descended through the toxic haze and landed in the capital city of Kethal once. This had been a place of beauty. The Cathari were famous for their architecture, for buildings that rose like frozen music toward the sky, all curves and spirals and impossible grace. Now, half those buildings stood empty, and the streets were filled with the quiet movement of a people preparing for the end. Captain Park Jin-ho led his crew out of the ship and into the dying city. 42 humans, scientists and engineers and medical staff, carrying equipment and supplies and nothing that looked like weapons. The Cathari watched them with wary eyes. Elder Chisk met them at the entrance to the council hall, surrounded by advisors who looked at the humans the way one might look at an unexpected storm. "So," she said, "you are here, and now I must ask the question that I have asked so many times before, knowing that the answer will be disappointment." She paused, and Park Jin-ho waited. "What can you actually do for us?" The elder asked. "You are 42 individuals on a single research vessel, and we are 9 billion people on a world that is being consumed by a weapon we cannot stop." Park Jin-ho looked at the elder, then at the dying city around them, then at his crew. "Show us the blight," he said. "Show us your research, your data, everything you have learned, and let us see what we can do." "Other species have said the same," Elder Chisk replied. "They reviewed our data, shook their heads, and left. We are not other species." The Cathari scientists led the human crew to the underground laboratories where they had spent 3 decades fighting a losing battle. The blight was displayed on massive screens, its structure rotating slowly, a thing of terrible beauty. It was a bioengineered weapon, designed by a species that had destroyed itself in a war so ancient that even the Cathari had only fragments of records. The weapon had been dormant for millions of years, until seismic activity had awakened it. And now it was doing what it had been created to do. It was killing a world. Dr. Beek Mina, the chief xenobiologist of the Persistent Dawn, studied the data with an intensity that the Cathari had never seen. She asked questions, demanded clarifications, and pushed deeper into the research than anyone had pushed before. Hours passed, then days. The human crew worked alongside the Cathari scientists, sharing meals in the underground cafeterias, learning names and faces and stories. They heard about families lost to the spreading blight, about cities abandoned, about children who would never see the sky turn blue again. And something changed. The Cathari began to notice that the humans did not leave when the work became difficult. They did not make excuses or cite protocols or demand payment. They just kept working hour after hour, refusing to stop even when exhaustion made their hands shake. On the 5th day, the Beek Mina announced that she had identified a potential counteragent, a compound that could neutralize the blight if they could synthesize enough of it. The laboratory fell silent. "There is a problem," she said, and her voice was tight with frustration. "The synthesis requires a catalyst that we do not have. A rare mineral compound that is only found in Valoric space." Elder Chisk closed her eyes. "Then it is hopeless," she said, "because the Valorics will not help us. And we cannot force them. We will ask anyway." Captain Park Jinho said, "They will refuse. Then we will find another way." The elder looked at the human captain, at his tired eyes and his stubborn jaw, and she shook her head slowly. "Why?" she asked. "Why do you keep trying when there is no reason to hope?" Park Jinho thought about the question for a long time before he answered. "Because giving up is easy," he said. "And easy is not always right." He filed a formal request for trade access with the Valorics Scientific Consortium. The refusal came within hours. Somewhere in orbit above Vera 7, a galactic assembly observation vessel had arrived, sent to watch the humans and report on their interference in what the assembly had classified as a natural extinction event. The galaxy was watching, and the humans kept working.